In front of you is the Emperor. The ruler of the human empire, the joint ruler of the Holy Terra and Mars, the Heavenly Father, Caesar, the Great Emperor, Augustus, the conqueror of the stars, the alien disaster stars, immortal wisdom, the curse of the wicked gods, the watchman on the golden throne, and most importantly, the eternal deity of humanity, the immortal faith, the greatest producer of suffering, and the greatest receiver of suffering. His legion is falling, his empire is dying, and all his most sacred and primal dreams are turning into ignorance and atrocities capable of killing himself. He is crying. He is screaming. He is powerless, witnessing endless malice in endless suffering. And me. I am the one who ended his suffering. Keywords of the novel. Warhammer. No pop-ups in the name of Nirvana. Warhammer. Download the complete set of TXT in the name of Nirvana. Warhammer. Read the latest chapters in the name of Nirvana. Chapter 1. Preface. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Preface. Morgan, my daughter, you are a failure, a thief, a disaster star, a nightmare, a torture, a person who feeds on pain throughout their life. You will hate pain, relying on pain, control the pain, finally becomes pain. Since he is unwilling to be loyal to the Emperor, let him remain silent. Yes, everything, his descendants and family, must remain silent. Do I still need to teach it myself? The voice of the elderly carries dissatisfaction with incompetence and weakness. McAdoo slowly walked along the thin gravel path, his footsteps slow and solid. He held his scepter tightly, buried his head under his tattered hood, lowered his head, and looked at the road. The palm printer of the empire, people always use this title to refer to him. Their tone was always filled with fear and hatred, as this seemingly dying old man had signed countless deadly laws. Every time his lips opened, thousands of lives would disappear from Terra's land. The survivors were whispering in the corner of the royal court, unaware of the power of McAdoo, making him aware of every evaluation and slander he received. But he never cared about all of this, especially when the highest voice called upon him. At the end of the road, there was a bunker buried under the rocks, with soldiers wearing golden armor standing on both sides, staring straight at each other. He pushed open the door and walked in, whispering from the gods and demons rushing towards him. Emperor! My lord! McAdoo bent down deeply. At this moment, the status, power, arrogance, and responsibility of being the mastermind of the empire are all worthless. The Lord of Terra, the Emperor, is frowning at this moment. In front of him were two huge, custom-made cultivation chambers that could not be understood with ordinary thinking. The tall figure of the Lord of Terra was clearly reflected on them, faintly covering the products inside. McAdoo is already 6,500 years old. Even among those immortals, this is a proud qualification, and of course, many of his emotions and memories have slowly worn away with the passage of time. But when he truly saw the indescribable thing in the cabin, he felt fear after a long absence. All repair actions for Experiment 2 have been declared unsuccessful. McAdoo, the Emperor, now dressed like a scientist, wearing a brand new, oversized white protective suit. With exhaustion and annoyance on his face, he took off his gloves and casually threw them at his feet. After a long time, his eyes fixed on the cultivation warehouse marked with the 2 symbol were still moved away, and the Emperor finally shook his head, his voice only filled with regret and anger for losing a precious creation. The palm printer remained silent, and after working with the Lord of Terra for a considerable period of time, he had gained a general understanding of the Emperor's character and nature. The ruler of Terra, the Emperor of humanity, and also the ruler of Mikado, he was never a good person or gentleman in the common sense. Countless years have washed away almost all of his emotions as a physical mortal. Although his will remains unshakable, rather than becoming an irreparable degenerate like some eternal beings, when he takes firm steps towards his goals, he never cares about so-called casualties and morality. When he displays exquisite acting skills and becomes a tired father and confidant, he will never let his thoughts change due to these ridiculous emotions. For him, life is just a fallen leaf in the forest. He will cherish the lush greenery and future development of the entire forest, but he will not hesitate to saw down any towering ancient tree. How can a person who can gaze at the four gods be a virtuous person? I must consider how to make up for my losses. The problem of individual two cannot be solved by any means today, and it is already difficult to achieve my predetermined goals. I originally planned to make number 1 the Imperial Guard and General, a guardian who would swing his sword to death for me, and number 2 would become the second Macadoo. I gave it the ability to explore and collect the unknown, the talent for spirituality and governance, and those even more frightening powers. It should have been more worthy of my trust and trust, becoming the most greedy and hypocritical helper to suit the roar and wildness of the twisted monsters I have created. But now, I miscalculated, and everything about number 2 needs to be pushed back to the beginning. The Emperor walked wearily in the room, his gaze circulating in the empty training chambers. In the transaction on Morrow, he gained enough power to shape the 20 most powerful assistants. Although he knew that not everyone could succeed, the failure did come too quickly. He began to plan how to stop losses in a timely manner, how to make a failed product unleash its maximum value in a short period of time. Even a ghost must serve the Emperor's cause and goals. The failed second pathogen is not alone, because the first pathogen had already been completed before it. It is a powerful, heroic, and perfect creation that pales in comparison to any other existence. Macadoo lifted his head and only glanced at number 2. In an instant, he understood what had caused the Emperor to abandon a genetic pathogen with unlimited prospects. Power, the power of evil gods, is lingering around this pathogen, and even the most humble spiritual beings can clearly feel its richness. As one of the greatest spiritual beings in the physical universe, Macadoo, the hand imprinter, goes one step further. He can clearly feel that the power belongs to both cunning and lustful beings. If there is any existence in the sky that all challengers are least willing to face, it is undoubtedly cunning. The Lord of Changes, the Lord of the Crystal Maze, and the chief designer of all the twists and turns of fate in the world. How it was formed and how it cast an unknown shadow over the history of countless races is no longer important. He is there, full of malice, enough to make all challengers feel a pressure from the depths of their hearts. Countless powerful civilizations have long fallen into obscurity with his laughter, and countless heroes have died and disappeared due to his arbitrary thoughts. This twisted and scheming ruler does not care about the past, the future, or even victory. All he desires is the same cry of sorrow that splashes when the fate of heroes and mortals fluctuates. Now, it is evident that he has set his sights on the Emperor's plan, plotting malicious schemes in a long series of jokes, and not just he is doing the same. In the highest heaven, the youngest god, the aura of lust and evil, also surrounds the Emperor's eyes without restraint. It is a blatant provocation, declaration, and advice. The Happy Prince uses this method to tell the Lord of Terra which one he desires in this transaction. Although compared to the 3 ancient gods, this one who rose from the great fall of the spiritual race is still too young and weak. No one doubts that the master of pleasure and all ultimate emotions will become an unshakable part of the highest heaven. He is using all means to steal power from all things in the world, causing the joyful Silver Palace to expand day by day. Now, the oldest and youngest deities in the subspace are simultaneously eyeing the unborn heir of the Emperor, warning the Emperor to fulfill their initial transaction terms with them. 20 genetic descendants, half of which belong to the highest heaven, subspace, and the 4 gods of chaos. However, the Emperor did not want to fulfill it. He will become a disloyal trading partner, a wicked fraudster, and a ruthless crisis PR. He is skilled in this field. The Lord of Terra squinted his eyes and began to contemplate how to deal more cost-effective with this abandoned heir. 3 equally evil great thoughts revolved around this unborn life, engaging in intrigues and conflicts with each other. At the same time, the hand printer continued his observation. This second pathogen, its physiology has become an absolute female under the distortion of subspace power. Compared to her strong brothers in another training chamber, she appears slender, pale, and frail, and the excessive nutrients promote her development and growth. Markadu can see her silver-white hair and faint blue pupils. But from another perspective, in the ocean of spirituality in spirituality, the imprinter sees an immensely terrifying, indescribable, and boundless behemoth. The power of the Lord of Changes and the Happy Prince revolves around this unborn child, their whispers and temptations never cease, like sharp daggers, eroding her spirit and thoughts. In the ocean of nothingness, the howls of the ever-changing Lord have already echoed, and the palm imprinter sees the faint blue light constantly appearing in the distant sky. Eagles with fang teeth and sharp feathers flock towards the sleeping genetic pathogen, and in an instant, they turn into ashes due to the cold light of the Emperor. The waves of the subspace were stirred up by the will of the ever-changing Lord, from the deepest void to the dome of the Holy Terra, where the treacherous will was everywhere. Markadu withdrew his divine consciousness, even he had to be cautious in this environment. For the real universe, the gods in the subspace are the most terrifying plague. Even a slight contamination is enough to leave the bones and hearts of the oldest survivors etched. The Emperor was still busy, his thoughts running at a meteor-like speed. Countless plans and schemes were brought up by him in an instant, but they were abandoned in the blink of an eye. Markadu caught a glimpse of the fragments and felt cold all over, with the words on them questioning his remaining conscience and morality. So, the hand printer raised his head again, this time his will changing angles in the void, ready to explore the attitude and attack of the Happy Prince towards this place. If the corruption of the traitor towards this pathogen has reached a point where the soul of the imprinter dare not linger for too long, then the possessiveness of the lustful evil towards the Emperor's daughter can be demonstrated by a more obvious and direct outcome. Markadu, the Hand Sealer. Perhaps the second most powerful person in the entire galaxy after the Emperor, has revealed his divine consciousness and plans to glimpse the imprint left by the Happy Prince on the second primordial. Then, he was knocked unconscious by the shock. Even the cold gaze of the Emperor could not dispel the mist of the Happy Prince staying here. The smirk and whispers had deeply burned into the body of the second pathogen, and it seemed that she was only one kneeling, a carnival, or a true blasphemy away from the lustful sin. The Emperor remained silent, his second work still belonged to him in the real universe, but in the highest heaven, the Happy Prince had already laughed and grasped her tightly. Only the beak of the Lord of Changes could tear open this grasp. But it is not cost-effective to start a war with Zigootion too early for this. He still needs time to shape more troops and facilities, complete his cards, and complete a gamble across the galaxy. The Emperor once again began to ponder, his thoughts as cold as hibernating snakes. As time passed, the gaze of the Lord of Terra swayed back and forth between the two completed works. After a long thought, he finally made a decision that was not too difficult. Markadu, he awakened his most trusted tool. Take a look here. The Emperor knocked on the chamber of the first pathogen, and from a spiritual perspective, they could see that this almost perfect creation actually had its own problems. Paranoid, solitary, wild, and stubborn arrogance are gifts bestowed by the power of the subspace, tightly attached to the soul of the first pathogen, like maggots attached to bones. We should weaken it, remove these unstable subspace factors, at least part of them. I don't like the hidden dangers in my successful works. Markadu rubbed his shoulder, his brain still tingling slightly from the impact of the deity. My lord, this is a very risky plan. The most important thing is, how should we handle these excluded subspace components? They must be placed in a suitable environment, otherwise these unique powers will one day backfire on them. There's no need to eliminate them all, just weaken them. I believe in their will, and I will input loyalty and obedience into the genes of these creations until the day I no longer need them. As he spoke, the Emperor kept rubbing his fingers, and then his gaze turned to the failed work, his second heir. The color in his pupils was like a tyrant looking at a scapegoat. And the place to deal with these evil thoughts, haven't we just obtained a ready-made one? The Emperor caressed the cold cabin and looked at his failed daughter with a different kind of satisfaction in his eyes. Since she is already an irreparable failure, let's make the most of the waste as much as possible. My daughter, my second, my first failed product. Morgan, end of this chapter. Chapter 2. Death of the Despice. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Death of the Despice. Morgan, my daughter, you are a failure. The sound echoed in her mind, like the waves of the sea beating against the cliffs. The baby in the cabin frowned tightly, immersed in a dream, a real dream. She could feel that at the beginning, she was in an empty container surrounded by cold nutrient solution and infusion tubes. The needle pierced the back of her hand, massaging her body and mind at will, transforming into a form that satisfied her creator. Morgan. Someone is calling her. Failed product. This voice mercilessly concluded, followed by the most intense pain, with thousands of shards tearing through her heart. She curled up and struggled helplessly. Next came the storm, where she could hear the ever-changing laughter and angry cries. She felt swept away by the storm, wandering through the void day after day, year after year, until she finally fell somewhere. She didn't know how long had passed after this, but at some point the sound of war and fighting came unusually clear. It was a crazy self-destructive battle, and she could hear whole legions surrounding her, fighting and destroying each other, until no more sound came. So she closed her eyes and continued to sleep soundly. Until the most despicable one visits from among the stars. Are you sure you're here, Chief Pastor? The vanguard cautiously stepped onto the dry and cracked land, with the Emperor on board. He may be the first human in thousands of years to set foot on such a remote and desolate land. The temperature-regulating device of Mk2 Power A is roaring because of the wind gust between clouds. The pioneer raises his head and finds that the next rainstorm is just around the corner. It seems that we must be fast. Who knows what the weather is like in this ghost place? It's definitely not too bad. The clerk was the second one to step down, adjusting his firearms. His gaze first lingered on the distant sky for a while, then returned to the ground, searching around for potential roads and dangers. Behind him, followed by two new recruits from the Legion, who looked left and right, maintaining the most standard defensive posture. According to the exploration diary of the Wandering Wanderer, it is highly likely that there are some traces of alien civilization here. Compared to the so-called weather, let's worry about the attackers. As soon as the secretary finished speaking, a new recruit tilted his head towards him. Sir, why don't we gather an exploration force and, according to the Legion Code, explore an alien world with an intelligence level of unknown at least? At least 50 soldiers, 1 warship, and 2 senior officers' written permission are required. I know, newcomer, I am responsible for teaching these rules. The clerk affectionately patted the shoulder armor of a new recruit and then smiled at another person. Believe me, it's allowed to be very effective in times of emergency. These perfunctory words obviously cannot convince anyone, but it is precisely at this time that the pastor came down. The pastor is a tall and dangerous figure. His broad chin, sunken eyes, and face engraved with scriptures make people shudder. With just one glance, the new recruit lowered his head in awe. The pastor squinted his eyes, like a wild fox that had just had a full meal. He enjoyed the awe for a while before slowly walking towards the depths of the dense forest. Be careful, newcomer. Behind him, the clerk smiled and comforted the 2 high-quality consumables around him. Pastor Ariba's temper is not very good. This is the era of rise. With the last cry of the past empires, the waves of chaos and madness have been surging in the galaxy for too long. Now, with unquestionable commands, new forces, new wills, new legions will crush them one by one, and another mighty giant is forging its own glorious chapter with steel and flames. This is a miraculous revival, the Nirvana of the Phoenix, an indestructible monument erected after countless efforts and sacrifices. Every victory and conquest adds luster to this legendary story. The great expedition has begun. The will of the Emperor comes from the Holy Terra, transforming into an endless army and fleet, interrogating every corner of the galaxy, reclaiming lost territory, destroying resistance, and spreading the conqueror's flag like a plague. Speculators, ambitious individuals, and despicable individuals are all shedding tears over this magnificent scene. They are pleasantly surprised to discover that in the waves of war, there are countless opportunities and treasures to discover. You can go and plunder. Erebus murmured, as alien skeletons and spirits piled up into hills at his feet. Emperor, what exactly happened here? Behind him, the new recruits lamented everything in front of them. This was a palace built of white bones, dyeing the muddy land into a snowy plain. The fragments of those bones were similar to those of humans, but their skulls mercilessly revealed their alien identities. These are the bones of the spirit clan, there may be thousands of them. The clerk searched and detected pieces of pendants and decorations, carefully discerning them. This is the language of the spirit clan. Jia. Jia Swa. Arkansas. This kind of twisted whip with thorns is more like a tool of torture. What is this? Is it a mask for acting? The clerk was exploring with great interest, even deviating from the team. Soon, the bones of some even larger beasts appeared in his eyes, mixed with the remains of some spiritual tribes. Obviously, in the last moment of his life, these aliens were fighting against the terrifying beasts or fighting side by side. In the end, he discovered something interesting, which was a communication device. After fiddling with it for a while, a final voice message drifted out of it. Elir, I really don't understand why we're fighting here. This is not defending the Ark. Our fellow races in the Milky Way are already so rare, but we still have to fight each other here. Note your attitude, Josiah. The prophets have received a prophecy that something in this world will destroy us, so we must first destroy it. Our wild companions will not agree. That thing has already merged with their world soul, and so have those clowns. They want to take it away, so, let's fight for it. Be careful. Those natural disasters of Comoros will come and kill us. The words came to a sudden halt, followed closely by chaotic gunshots and roars of war, followed by howls of sorrow. That was a mixed wail of thousands, chaotic and terrifying, as if the souls of thousands of people were being pulled out alive by some force. The clerk frowned, threw away the thing, clapped his hands, quickly caught up with the team, and returned to his position behind him. He lowered his head in the displeased gaze of Reverend Aribas, then continued his job. Adjusting the muzzle and staring at the two adorable new recruits. The team was advancing, with Aribas closing his eyes and muttering a word, allowing the 8-pointed star carving tightly held in his palm to take him to the deepest part of the battlefield. There was a towering ancient wood, incredibly tall and majestic, but hanging and dying, just like this world. The foolish act of prophecy, the cannibalism of the same kind, the scream of the soul. Here we are. Almost there. An ominous light appeared in the palm of his hand, and Aribas showed a satisfied smile. He walked into the ancient tree, and in the shadow, he saw the treasure wrapped in layers of withered vines. The last step, the vague whispers of the gods flashed through his mind, which made Aribas even more convinced that his piety had been rewarded. The blood of betrayal. Aribas turned his head and, accompanied by his gaze, the clerk mercilessly pulled the trigger. Accompanied by 2 gunshots, the new recruits widened their eyes and collapsed, one in front and one behind. Of course, they would die because only their guns were not aimed at their companions. The vanguard also raised his gun and aimed it at the new recruit's head, firing 1 shot at a time to ensure there were no future threats. Even Aribas's mind pondered upon seeing this scene. What kind of reason should we weave this time? After a brief moment of distress, excitement once again occupied the heart of the despicable person. He drew his short blade and smeared the flowing blood onto the withered vine. Behind him, the vanguard looked at the 2 gradually cold corpses and suddenly turned his head to look at the clerk. You said. Does the Emperor really know what we have done? If he really knew, we would have died countless times already. The clerk just lazily yawned. Wake up, this is the first time. In the excited gaze of the chief pastor, the final protective measures were broken layer by layer, and the world let out an irreparable cry of sorrow, followed by the sound of a thunderous collapse in the ocean of souls. He saw that it was a private paradise where metal and rattan intertwined, a strong fortress protecting precious treasures, and also a blessing from the gods. Through the subtle metal cracks, he saw a pair of pale eyebrows, perhaps belonging to a baby. It seems that he needs a pair of knives and forks, preferably to shred soft skin and bones, so that he won't bite his teeth while enjoying the blessings. Wake up, this is the second time. Erebus continued his howling, the sound like the sharp scraping of blades, making the ocean of souls boil and echoing in the ears of the sleeper over and over again. He saw his eyebrows slowly furrow, as if a quiet dream had been shattered, and the newly born branches were enjoying the morning light, trembling with the unreasonable cold wind. Erebus smiled and continued. Wake up, this is the third time. Even the birds in the sky fell one after another due to this hoarse roar, and the sea of souls was turbulent. The vanguard and the clerk tightly covered their ears, and their heads only felt as they bumped left and right in their helmets. The light eyebrows have twisted tightly together, and their owners are still resisting, trying in vain to stay in their beautiful dreams, rejecting the coldness of reality. Erebus quieted down, no longer roaring. He patiently waited until the waves of his soul calmed down from madness, until the whole world seemed to have calmed down as a result. He waited until the pale eyebrows in his field of vision slowly stretched out from their lifeless distortion, and finally completely flattened. Obviously, the dream had once again descended. The chief pastor curled his lips, feeling genuine joy for his next move. He turned his voice into a pure scream, a sonic spear capable of piercing all brains. This is the last time. Wake up. Finally, the thing opened its eyes. She woke up. The massacre has begun. The first person to fall is the vanguard. The veteran had just recovered from his coma and was carefully admiring the shocked expressions of the two deceased with an extremely teasing attitude. This was his bad hobby, but then, Astat's superhuman senses made him realize something. Pastor! He screamed, but before the plea for help was completed, an invisible force struck from the void, first the head, then the chest, arms, and legs. This heavy warrior was pulled into mid-air, crushed inch by inch, like a crushed milk can, with blood streaming down to the ground. The clerk looked at all of this in horror, but soon felt a cold wind passing through his body. He struggled to lower his head, only to see blood flowing from his knees, and then the piercing pain. Eric Base's gun was smoking, and he glanced at the abdomen that had been pierced in the knee by his own hand, which had been pulled and torn apart by an invisible hand. He then turned his head and ran wildly. He ran faster and faster, running faster and faster. He ran desperately through the dense forest and bones, and the strong wind heard a tearing sound in his ears. The flying speed even surprised him. Faster, farther, faster, higher, faster, 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 wait. He finally reacted. Erebus lowered his head and saw a shattered corpse lying in the most inconspicuous corner, every inch from the head to the abdomen, from the arms to the toes, shattered into powder by some violent force. He even felt that the body looked a bit familiar. Then, he realized that it was himself. Erebus's soul couldn't help but look around in confusion. Then, he felt pain, not physical pain, but soul. His soul was torn apart by an angry and violent force, like a hurricane devouring clouds. Before he could scream, this despicable little thing was casually crushed, like a bug accidentally stomped to death, plain and unremarkable. At the last moment, he only realized that the vague sound in the void was becoming clear, he realized that it was endless ridicule, he only realized that it was not a gift, not even a gaze. That's just a mockery. Morgan woke up. She was awakened. Therefore, she was very irritable and somewhat confused. Memories rushed in like a flood tide, shattering the well-organized brain. She suddenly remembered some intense sounds, the screams and roars of thousands of lives, and then she screamed in dissatisfaction, and those sounds disappeared. She began to move her limbs, only to find them fragile and short. After some attempts, she reluctantly stood up. She felt empty, curious, and hungry. She's hungry, she needs something to eat. The dreamy memory appeared intermittently, guiding her to extend her consciousness, and a few strands of nothingness wandering in mid-air were easily grasped by her. This is the soul. Her brain immediately told her this. She had eaten it, and while she was still asleep, she had eaten hundreds or even thousands of the same things, but they didn't seem completely consistent with the one in front of her. She looked carefully and found that among these 5 nothingness foods, one of the souls seemed particularly dirty and ugly, yet very attractive. Driven by hunger, she still opened her mouth. An unimaginable delicacy. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Hunger. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Hunger. Pain. This is the most intuitive feeling and also the most destructive instinct. Even a newborn genetic pathogen cannot always resist such a crazy force. She felt hungry. There is also pain, which comes from the pain in the brain, and it can be dull and annoying. The dirty yet incredibly delicious soul named Erebus did not soothe the emptiness deep within her soul, but instead completely released the frozen ice flood like the first rain of early spring. Hunger, the most primitive instinct, kept roaring in her mind, demanding satisfaction. Morgan frowned. In this roar, she could clearly hear some distant laughter mixed in. The laughter was neither male nor female, filled with an indelible charm and thirst, like an evil courtier mocking the king who had been poisoned by it. Amidst the wild laughter, she could faintly hear a hint of deep whispers, like a hypocritical mother lamenting her efforts and hard work, and naturally demanding her submission and joy. And every second this laughter continued, her hunger expanded by a minute, constantly destroying her rationality, yearning to turn her into some indescribable beast. She must solve it, at least find a way to temporarily suppress it. Soul. She could hear the voice yearning for something, and this longing had become the best driving force at the moment, urging her to leave her place unsteadily and ultimately walk towards the ruins of that messy battlefield. Under the bloody sunset of the wilderness, Morgan walked. Even the craziest and most unconventional artist in the galaxy cannot imagine such a scene. A baby is walking in the dead cold wind, strolling on the ancient battlefield like this. A blazing new heart moves forward among countless white bones, as if it is worshipping and patrolling its own temple. In front of this white bone worshipper, there were countless strange-shaped snowflakes that seemed to wander in mid-air with the mournful sound of the wind, unwilling to melt for a long time. But if you observe more carefully, you will find that carved on these so-called snowflakes, it is not a pure white, but countless screaming, twisted faces, each representing a soul in vain on the battlefield. Some of them are pure white, like innocent guardians, while others are the opposite to the extreme black, emitting a chilling and violent aura, and more are a mottled mixture of black and white. No matter what, they are now nothing but powerless and resentful nothingness. Thousands of twisted souls floated in front of Morgan like this, spinning, howling, and cursing this extraordinary baby in unrecognizable language, because they died for her. This is really a big meal. So she reached out her invisible hand and easily grabbed one, carefully observing the sharp appearance and ferocious face on it. Although her memories were still shattered and blurred, as if an irresistible force was preventing her from pursuing her past experiences, those innate knowledge reserves opened the door to her without hesitation. She glanced at the delicious food she was about to enjoy, and her mind automatically recognized the masters of these souls. They belonged to some kind of alien. As soon as she thought of the alien, an impulse filled with killing and destruction stirred up waves in her heart, and with this impulse, the pain in her mind intensified, making her frown uncontrollably. Suppressing these chaotic thoughts and temporarily blocking the distant laughter, Morgan closed his eyes and quietly threw the alien soul into his mouth. The taste can only be said to be very strong, far less delicious than that of the Erebus, but it can satisfy hunger, and the pain in her mind seems to have eased a bit. So, this is the first one, 14th, 15th, 16th, Morgan licked the corner of his mouth. She was sitting in the very center of this ancient battlefield, clutching the delicious food called soul. At first, she just chewed it recklessly, and after a slight fullness, she slowed down and began to carefully feel the taste between her lips and teeth. With the continuous influx of energy, the superhuman thinking ability of the genetic pathogen gradually unblocked and flowed. She spent some time reading and organizing thousands of memory fragments and chaotic knowledge in her brain one by one. As her will became clearer, the soul of the genetic pathogen could even briefly drift away from her body and reach the sky. With this outstanding perspective, Morgan began to observe the world she was in and quickly understood everything in front of her. She looked around and saw nothing but ruins, desolate and desolate. The so-called civilization had turned into corpses and smoke, scattered throughout the vast land and burning forests. This world was once vibrant, until the weapons and malice carried by war completely destroyed it. She tried her best to climb up and gaze into the distance, only to discover the blurry shadow of a village on the skyline, but it had also been submerged in thick smoke. But that's not her business. What she needs now is clothing that can cover her body, means to protect herself, and more souls. She needs to eat them as much as possible to alleviate the pain in her brain, to fill endless hunger, and to gain more knowledge and strength. Those who wear strange armor, calling themselves the Whisperers, want to harm her, and the number is unknown. She must use all means to protect herself. 67th, 68th, 69th, these alien souls are fragile and delicious. When she chews them one by one, she can draw a trace of sweetness from them. And such delicious dim sum are now all over the sky. They wander above layers of white bones, emitting a dying wail and scream. After swallowing another soul, Morgan moved her limbs and found that they could withstand running and throwing. So, she picked up a dagger from the shattered corpse, waved it twice, and began to move towards the most densely packed area of the bones. After a moment, she was already wrapped in a trimmed piece of clothing and a few small trinkets. After satisfying her basic sense of shame, she continued to eat on her own. 251st, 252nd, 253rd. Under the urging of instinct and hunger, she continued to devour those howling souls until she could not count how much she had swallowed, until the ocean of consciousness faintly emitted a temporary contentment sound, until her spirit finally replenished its energy, enough to discover the true essence of these souls. Peeling open the wall composed of thousands of howling bodies, Morgan discovered three interesting things. That were three particularly huge souls, obviously maintaining a similar posture to those of their pitiful kind like mud. The two more pure souls glared at her angrily, while the more sinful ones could hardly conceal their fear. We can talk about it. The pitch-black alien, resembling a slave owner, had just spat out its plea for mercy when Morgan's fingertips pierced it without hesitation. She threw the howling creature into her mouth, feeling its scent closest to that of the Erebus. "You wicked beast!" Upon witnessing this scene, the exquisitely dressed white alien finally poured out a vicious curse. "The Prophet Council has long known about your arrival, and the greatest prophets tremble for your dark future. We have mobilized all guardians and rangers, fire dragons and howling banshees, and even powerful ghost structures. This should have killed you, should have ended your humble and filthy life, strangled your fate to the brink of this barbaric stars. If it weren't for these ignorant guys, these ignorant compatriots, and this damn corrupt scumbag of conquerors, we would have done it long ago. You, the running dog of evil gods, the puppet of tyranny, and the despicable beast, I know what you rely on. You have become his servant and slave like those pitiful races who give up on themselves, disregarding everything for even a moment of pleasure for your master. Our army was originally only one step away from you, until your master intervened and saved you, making our souls your food and drink. Do you know his nature? Do you know your pitiful and ridiculous future? You. Its curse may have just begun, but Morgan's patience was already tormented by this vague and hypocritical statement, and her consciousness spread and danced like a sharp blade, instantly piercing through the body of the alien. The alien's companions or guards wanted to sacrifice themselves to resist, but the result was that two screaming souls disappeared into Morgan's sea of souls at the same time, without a sound. It's sour. Compared to the sweet and delicious taste of Ariba's and other dark souls, these more pure and quirky souls are either as bland as water or sour and difficult to swallow. But they were indeed very effective, as the final sound of these powerful aliens disappeared from Morgan's consciousness. She only felt the unbearable hunger dissipate, and the sharp pain in her mind gradually subsided, eventually reaching a completely negligible level. Subsequently, the genetic pathogen felt drowsy. She lifted her head and found that the sky was now shrouded in dark clouds. Soon, accompanied by an unprecedented violent hurricane during the day, raindrops and hail of all sizes fell from the clouds, mercilessly smashing towards the ground, destroying large areas of remains and jungle. Obviously, this barbaric world does indeed have the same side as its name. But before that, the pathogen had returned to its own narrow space, and this circular fortress made of metal and branches was still a reliable barrier that could protect its body temperature in the cold of the night. So, after confirming the safety of the habitat for the last time, Morgan quickly fell asleep. This time, no one should disturb her anymore. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Pain. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Pain. Wake up quickly, don't evade your fate, you were born to break free from it at all costs, a distant voice awakened her. Morgan opened his eyes, only to find himself in a starry sky, with an endless black earth beneath her feet. A pale blue star hung in the sky, constantly flickering in her pupils, attracting her footsteps. Almost without much thought, she followed suit. Some voices in her heart told her to believe in this star, but when she focused and wanted to distinguish these sounds, she couldn't hear them clearly. She walked forward, her footsteps creating layers of ripples on the earth, like small stones thrown into a pond, and the starry sky began to move with her footsteps. And as she took about the 100th step, everything suddenly changed. The once quiet and round stars grew fangs in an instant, turning into monsters with wide fangs and claws. At this moment, those tranquil stars seemed like a group of hungry predators, rapidly advancing, entangled and twisted, finally tightly huddled together, but suddenly exploded. Countless deep blue and light purple tendrils protruded from the explosion, like two fierce deep-sea giant squids. They immediately fought together, while allowing countless tentacles to reach into the boundless sky, as if dropping a large drop of blood into a wine glass. The entangled colors of blue and purple filled her gaze in the blink of an eye. They roared and struggled, from the farthest depths of the void to the closest confrontation in front of them. Each tendril and blade was risking their own interests for the sake of their master. They fought against each other and came to Morgan's side, without hesitation pulling on the newborn child, intending to embrace her in their arms. The power that belonged only to the gods stirred up another war in the narrow starry sky. Countless evil thoughts and emotions erupted from their respective gods, eventually colliding and blending, becoming an eyeless vortex that enveloped Morgan, rushing step by step towards the unknown front. Hunger, distortion, transformation, relaxation, seeking knowledge, arrogance, desire, resistance, they tore at her, fiercely condemning her in the name of gifts and gods, yet mercilessly. Pulling, brute force, dragging, howling. Until she was overwhelmed. Until she let out a scream. Until that merciless golden light fell from the sky. The golden light turned into a big sword, an unimaginable annihilating divine weapon. It split from the sky and in the blink of an eye, it cut through countless mist and nightmares. The blue and purple tentacles screamed and disappeared in front of this cold golden light. Then, it emitted a towering red and golden flame, and the terrifying picture that had just covered the sky burned out in an instant. After completing all of this, the golden sword did not stop at all. It was raised high again, fiercely chopped down, and tore open a huge crack on the pure black earth. The crack quickly began to expand and collapse, and blood and cries of sorrow flowed continuously from it. Accompanied by everything that happened before her, Morgan's brain began to ache again, a bone-piercing pain, as if someone had stabbed her eye sockets and nose bridge with a dining knife, hitting her spiritual cap one by one, crushing her skull bit by bit. She could even hear the piercing friction sound wandering in her ear. She could clearly feel the expansion of the crack in front of her, and her pain began to spread all the way from her forehead to her body, tormenting her body and mind. The violent force accompanied the merciless blow, making Morgan unable to resist kneeling on the ground. The genetic pathogen has fully understood. This starry sky is no different from this pure black earth, it is her mind, it is her spiritual world. And now, it has become a place for some even more terrifying entities to fight, and has become riddled with wounds. The power of Yulon and Deep Purple is naturally full of malice, but the seemingly brilliant giant sword is not simply meant to protect her. The appearance of the Great Rift did not stop the continuation of the struggle. The blue and purple tentacles quickly made a comeback, fighting against the golden giant sword, and also fighting against each other. This competition was accompanied by constant deceit among the three sides, dragging each other back and gradually becoming meaningless. In the end, the situation stabilized, and the forces of gold, blue, and purple each occupied one place, almost dividing Morgan's mind. In the blue field, a tall tower has been erected, in the purple kingdom, a palace appeared, and the golden sword was rudely inserted into the open land, marking an equally golden territory. They each rested, leaving Morgan standing in front of this big crack, curled up, feeling the sincere pain. The wills of the gods and creators have turned into indelible steel nails, deeply ingrained in her mind. Look at it. What a heartless and magnificent scene. The weak should be slaughtered. Don't worry, you will adapt to all of this. Your madness is so powerless, your pain is the eternal treasure. Now, go take a look at that sharp blade, it is a gift from your creator, and it is also the best proof of plunder and defense. He defends his prey like a wild beast, so that he can swallow it alone. You. The voice fell silent again, as if it had endless patience waiting for the listener's answer. After an unknown amount of time, the almost eternal pain finally eased slightly. Morgan looked up and saw a small snowflake slowly falling. She quickly realized that it was not snowflakes, but white spirits with their teeth and claws open. They were the countless souls she had devoured before. They drifted and scattered, falling into the big crack one after another, like real snowflakes that quickly melted on the muddy land. However, as more and more souls drifted down, some eventually accumulated, causing insignificant snow-white to appear in the huge crack. With the appearance of this snow-white touch, Morgan's brain pain began to weaken to the minimum extent, and she was able to draw out a bit of energy to observe the appearance of the last batch of souls. Those were the three most powerful aliens that she had swallowed up. As expected, with the appearance of those souls, a cool feeling began to emerge. She witnessed the three souls slowly falling to the bottom of the crack, accumulating even more snow-white than before. Morgan stood up and breathed a long sigh of relief. Everything is already clear. Although she still couldn't remember her past and couldn't recognize who caused it all, she already knew her situation. Three temporarily uncontrollable strong wills divided her spiritual kingdom, perhaps her creators or ill-intentioned others. But no matter what they were, she could not resist them for the time being. Fortunately, they are equally hostile to each other. Compared to these, what is more important now is to solve the big fissure in front of her. This huge wound is constantly expanding, and it is constantly breaking open or down Morgan's realm of will, using pain to interrupt her thinking and progress. Pain, yes, it's painful. It is the most universal language in the universe, the most simple truth, the greatest cause, and the closest companion. This is also a curse that you cannot escape. Look at yourself, pitiful little one, do you know your own destiny? Your great creator, your cold-blooded father of genes, even I cannot help but be surprised by the gift he has given you. The golden blade stands there, a symbol of his power and rule, as well as a means of tyranny and control. Let me tell you, little one. You know the butcher's nail. The essence of the civilization of all races for thousands of years. The place where the golden blade is destroyed and where it stands is not more gentle than the butcher's nail. Although it will not make you a rough man like brass, it will also drive your fate with pain and power, because in his eyes, you, a failure, should be like this. Morgan. Failed product. The voice in memory reappeared with this heartless conclusion, and the distant golden sword slowly shook, as if admitting everything. Twisted voices echoed around, but Morgan's mind had fallen into a deep self-protection under the torment of pain. She recorded those voices, but only thought about her own affairs. That pain, it must be resolved first. She needs souls, those alien souls, or those pure black souls, but not enough. Morgan propped her forehead in agony as the pain gradually dissipated, clearing her mind. Not enough, far from enough. This huge fissure is like a chasm, stretching from her feet all the way to the end of her field of vision, possibly thousands of kilometers wide. If only those scattered snowflakes were to fill it, she would probably have to devour countless worlds, kingdoms, and civilizations in order to achieve this. She needs a more efficient way. Yes, efficiency. Efficiency is the crystallization of the Milky Way, it is the primary driving force for all civilizations and destruction. The sound appeared again, accompanied by a blue star that drew out from the skyline and fell before her eyes. You were born as a failure, but the hatred of the loser is the sweetest. No. Wait, no, look at what I'm saying, you don't even know what hatred is. You have the freedom of anxiety and irritability, but you do not have true emotions. Whether it is your joys, sorrows, or grudges, they have been completely taken away and suppressed by your Creator. He does everything in his power to make you as useful as possible and to go against the true path as much as possible. A despicable guy. It's not in vain for me to appreciate him. Morgan squinted her eyes. Although she couldn't understand the emotions, grievances, and grudges mentioned in the voice, when she heard the so-called deprivation and suppression, her gaze instinctively turned to the giant sword. This voice is right. Her innate knowledge taught her what emotions and emotions are, but she couldn't understand. These so-called emotions in her heart were like a forest that had been cut down. They existed, but when the outside breeze blew, only the remaining leaves of grass were powerless to shake and stir up any waves. No need to worry, little one. The one who indulges in pleasure and laziness is also watching over you. He will help you solve all of this. He will give you gifts, making you a cunning mirror, reflecting on others' thoughts and secrets in your heart. Use words and actions to capture their hearts and usurp their souls. Those truly powerful and precious souls, belonging to your kind and brothers, will completely solve the cracks in your heart, and even go further, making you a true, complete person. Get rid of pain, get rid of slavery, get rid of everything you were born to bear, and gain a new life, also, freedom. The most precious freedom. Morgan remained silent, not believing the sharp words of the unknown, not a word, but she had to admit one thing. Its ideas and suggestions were heart-wrenching. A person, a true, complete person. And freedom. Once this idea appeared, it was as if she had gained some kind of magic, firmly occupying her heart. And with this magic, the most arrogant laughter appeared, unlike the distant laughter she had heard before. It was within reach, wild and disorderly. That's right, that's right. Go ahead, deceive, plunder, follow your instinctual guidance, turn your failed fate around, turn your pain into a sharp arrow, and shoot at the initiator who causes you so much pain. Tread on the trust of the proud one, embellish the devout bower, seize the kindness of the ignorant, ignite the anger of the betrayer, let war spread everywhere. Let the Milky Way burn down, let everything burn to ashes. I am looking forward to your tracks. In a long string of sharp laughter, the sound that echoed through the sky finally disappeared, and the blue stars emitted a dazzling light as it left. When this light dissipated, Morgan had already woken up. Outside the cabin, it was still pouring rain, and the figures of thunder and lightning leaped on the distant sky, faintly visible. Morgan looked out the window at the heavy rain and suddenly realized that the cabin had become a bit small. Without a doubt, she was growing and growing at a fast pace. The reflection of raindrops and dark clouds appeared on her face. In these layers of reflection, Morgan began to think about her tomorrow and future. What she wanted to do, what she wanted to learn and practice, how she wanted to grow and absorb as much as possible, so leave here. The remnants of that voice still echoed in her mind, but she didn't pay much attention. Morgan watched the rainstorm outside the window, and the cyan pupils of the gene plasma seemed to be colder than the sky of the wild world. She doesn't care if she wants to deceive and plunder, trample and burn, or let any world become ashes, just like the scenery in front of her. But no matter what she needs to do to end her fate, change her shattered spiritual world, and prevent her from falling into this desperate death, she will accept it. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Dawn Redemption 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Dawn Redemption 1. Everything started to spiral out of control a month ago. The first one was the magnetic vortex, which caused at least 12,000 kilometers of destruction in the south of the world, followed by the shutdown of power and water systems worldwide, killing thousands of residents. At first, we thought it was just a natural disaster and an opportunity for cultists to make trouble, but in reality, the situation was much worse than we had anticipated. In the following 7 days, 3 more accidents occurred consecutively, and an inexplicable storm has swept across the world, destroying all power grids and communication facilities. The distribution of food and water has also been affected, and people have begun large-scale riots. There is also an earthquake, the strongest earthquake. Li Mingxing's largest nest has been completely devoured by underground cracks, and 3 cities have disappeared one after another in tsunamis hundreds of meters high. Moreover, the sage of the mechanical education has inferred that the atmosphere has been severely eroded, and deadly radiation is about to sweep across the entire world. In the past month, we have lost 3/4 of our population, social order has completely collapsed, and the situation is irreparable. In view of this situation, I, the Governor-General of Li Mingxing, Conrad Walga, who is protected by the will of the Emperor, officially declare my abandonment of this world. We have issued evacuation orders on the final communication platform, and everyone in this world is flocking to the planet capital Carina. The infrastructure here is strong and spacious enough to accommodate all of them, but we lack a fleet. Evacuating fleet. For this reason, I am sending a signal of distress here. Anyone, any Emperor's people, any expedition fleet not far from us, I implore you to temporarily shift your direction and save Li Mingxing, who is also a citizen of the Emperor. And that's why we're here. At the average level of 1,000 child warrior, Hassel, Mart believed he had enough respect for these pitiful mortals and made things as easy to understand as possible. After the governor of Li Mingxing sent the desperate plea for help through the Star Whisperer, he and this pitiful world almost immediately received the Emperor's mercy. The expedition fleet of the Estat Legion gave a response in the 17th hour after the news was sent. They happened to be crossing the edge of this star region, and the Legion's genetic pathogen, Magnus from Prospero, was also willing to help mortals in most cases. Thanks to the rotation guidance of countless powerful spiritual beings, the 28th Expeditionary Fleet almost immediately carried the entire Qianzi Legion to the near-Earth orbit of Li Mingxing, and the situation here was even worse than what the Genoplasma had imagined. Even the imperial governor who sent a distress letter had lost his message in the chaotic crowd, and the Qianzi Legion could only handle the various troubles in the world before them alone. If it were for the heavily armed Dark Angel or Shadow Moon Wolf Legion, the situation might have been better, but the Thousand Suns Legion, as its name suggests, only about 1,000 soldiers survived the tragedy known as the Flesh and Blood Mutation, and just over a dozen Terra Standard years was not enough to make this legion strong again. Thinking of this, Hasselmat couldn't help but sigh deeply in his heart. If it weren't for the shortage of manpower, even a rising star of the Bright Feather School wouldn't have come to do the tedious task of evacuating villages. Listen, mortal, I'll say it again, one last time. Magnus' descendants worked hard to keep themselves calm. He squinted his eyes and observed the old man in front of him. Ragged, trembling like a sieve of bran, and the only valuable object all over his body was the cane carved with a slender venomous snake. Hassel could see fear and complete resistance flickering deep in his pupils, which was a normal expression of mortals facing imperial angels. There was also phlegm, uncontrollable black phlegm flowing from the corner of his mouth. Hassel didn't take a closer look. Looking back now, take a look at this mountain. The place where you used to live for generations is not as peaceful as it seems. It was a dead volcano, but now, the magnetic fusion of your world has reactivated it, turning it back into an active volcano. Truly, a volcano. Do you know what this means, mortal? Now look around you, there are over 500 people here. Farmers, blacksmiths, women, and children, as well as more than 20 houses and barren terraced fields. The only connection between this place and the outside world is a railway, which is obviously broken. Qianzi's arm, accompanied by his fingertips, pointed towards the buried waste on the hillside. The so-called railway track was already broken and tattered, bending like a decaying snake below the village. Above this decaying object, the sky had already shown some ominous signs, and any visually impaired person could see the gas hovering over the mountain gradually transforming into a sickly yellow. Behind them were layers of floating volcanic ash, even mixed with lightning and storms. This dilapidated place will be completely destroyed within a maximum of 10 Terra Standard Hours, while he is still playing boring language games with these fools here. Anxiety is constantly encroaching on Hassel's brain. But he couldn't take action. There were only 5 of them, and they couldn't take away all the fools. Moreover, as an Estat warrior, certain unspeakable principles were preventing him from attacking these unarmed imperial princes and civilians. Have you seen those gases? The volcanic ash, thunder, and storms will kill you, kill all of you, and your home will explode, leaving no residue. And now, thanks to the mercy of my Lord Magnus, you can board the Stormwind and join us to safe areas, such as Carina or somewhere else, and leave this world. The ones who really left should be you. In front of Hassel, the trembling old man slowly raised his fist and held it in mid-air as an answer to a stat. Now, you. Cough cough cough. Should leave, we will stay here, stay in our hometown and fields. He kept coughing, his lean body spitting out thick black-brown phlegm one after another, so much so that it even made people wonder if he had vomited all his internal organs together. You will all die. Hassel could hardly contain his anger. If this continues, you will all die here, and my people and I have been ordered to evacuate you. Don't let me say the same thing again, those storms will kill you. No, on the contrary. Storms are gifts, and all of us have been waiting for them for a lifetime. They will lead us to meet the great chairman of storms, Tan. We will stand by their side and enjoy eternal peace and happiness. This foolish statement made Magnus' descendants couldn't help but widen their eyes, and when he saw the same persistence appearing in the eyes of all mortals, his anger doubled and turned into some of the most absurd laughter. He couldn't help but laugh. Lord of the Storm. Attendant. Are you believing in a crude god? Sacrificing your life for a juggling joke? You are not allowed to insult our faith. Mortals, all mortals, fell into hysterical rage at the moment his words landed, their faces ferocious, entertaining this blasphemer with the most vicious curses. But Magnus' descendants didn't care. He turned around and walked towards Stormwind and his comrades. How is the situation? Someone is asking him. They don't want to leave, let's go. Hassel waved his hands, but after laughing, his mood was still bad because of this deep-rooted foolishness. What kind of titan is that again? The other Qianzi warriors were not surprised, but they quickly raised new questions. What about our mission? They will definitely die here. Then let them die. Hassel's harsh reprimand caused a momentary silence in his team, until his deputy signaled him to look at the horizon. Another Stormwind was shakily preparing to land. Ah! Qianzi's mood began to improve, especially when he saw the silver-haired and blue-eyed lady walking down from the Stormwind. Hassel simply sat down with his team, waiting for the task to be completed. Sure enough, let Ms. Morgan handle things like this, she has never disappointed anyone. Hassel thought of it. Regarding Ms. Morgan's reputation, Hassel had heard of it before coming to Limingxing. It is said that she came from the southern part of the Great Whirlpool, which is the home of the extreme warriors in the northwest of the 500 worlds. After an expedition fleet composed of merchant Ronin discovered her hometown, she joined the imperial army as a descendant of the local prince. Some rumors suggest that her background is not actually true, but those rumors, accompanied by this mortal's outstanding performance, are naturally seen as rumors filled with jealousy. This Ms. Morgan quickly proved herself to be a gifted spiritual master and an outstanding practitioner. In less than a Terra Standard year, she stood out from countless mortals and became a selected officer for the scarce Thousand Sons Legion. Hassel has always been uninterested in the affairs of mortals. He considers himself a higher life form, but after working with Ms. Morgan for over 50 days, he has to admit that sometimes she can make people look forward to it. As he pondered, the conversation in the village had undergone a completely new transformation. The silver-haired female official made these foolish believers obedient in just a few words, rushing to pack up their belongings and then following in the footsteps of the lady. As they lowered their heads and lined up towards Stormbird, Chico couldn't help but ask in Morgan's ear in a low voice. "How did you persuade these fools?" "Use some of the most foolish means." She spoke vaguely, but Hassel didn't choose to ask too much. For some reason, when faced with this less smiling face, he could always feel some kind of fear. He thinks this is an illusion. Magnus' descendants maintained arrogance and vigilance, watching coldly as his subordinates chatted with this mortal, while the guys on another Stormwind had almost turned their heads to her. It had only been more than 50 days, truly insulting the reputation of the Legion. Just as the rising star of the Bright Feather School felt indignant, his communication equipment began to ring. "How is the situation on your end, Hassel?" It is the voice of Ahriman from the Black Crow School. "It's already done. With the help of our Ms. Morgan." After a moment of contemplation, Hassel did not claim this credit. "I think so, after all, it's Morgan." Ahriman first sighed calmly, then his tone became slightly urgent. "Then hurry back to Karina. We urgently need manpower here, and we need to comprehensively modify the entire world's evacuation plan. The two genes are reflected in the need for all forces' help, whether it's you or Ms. Morgan." "Two of you." Hassel captured some information. "Yes, two people." Ahriman first affirmed this point, and then continued speaking in a casual tone. Hassel could hear hoarse commands and the noisy flow of people around him. "Pechalabo is here, along with his Iron Warrior." End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Dawn Redemption, 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Dawn Redemption, 2, whenever looking at Karina from the highest point, Ahriman always remembers his hometown. No, it's not Holy Terra, although he was indeed born there. Although Ahriman was equally enamored with the undulating hills, dry deserts, and warm valleys of the Achaemenid region, as well as the lonely roots sleeping in ancient brick and stone city jars, like all the thousand-child veterans, from the moment he saw their genetic father's hometown. Prospero, Ahriman had already regarded this isolated Eden as his new homeland. In Ahriman's view, Prospero is the most beautiful place in the entire galaxy, especially the soul of that world. Tiska, the City of Light, gathers the efforts of countless wise men, including Magnus himself. It is the center of wisdom and art, the aesthetic embodiment of order and senses, and a wonderful paradise exclusively for the seekers constructed by black coasts and snow-white marble. On Karina, Ahriman can vaguely see the shadow of his hometown. The history of this city can be traced back to the most glorious golden age of humanity. Its huge, elegant, and harmonious structure symbolizes unlimited confidence and imagination for civilization and the future at that time. "What are you looking at, Ahriman?" A heavy voice came, interrupting the descendants of Magnus who were immersed in their own world. The newcomer was a rough piece of steel, wrapped in a sturdy Mk3 power armor, covered in simple yellow and black stripes, indicating that he was a warrior loyal to the Olympian lord Pechalabo. Ahriman could smell the scent of those who came, a mixture of many foul odors, including the salty sea breeze, the cries of refugees, the hustle and bustle of war, the profoundness of blood and tears, and the anxiety that the entire city was currently filled with. I am observing this city, Fricks. Ahriman strives to make his voice sound as respectful and normal as possible. I think we should take action. This city and its countless mortals are in a dangerous situation, filled with fear and unknowns. My soldiers tell me that every day, hundreds of mortals leave safe areas and return to the dangerous wilderness without authorization. Captain Qianzi's repeated words made Fricks nod uncontrollably, and his eyes, like the most sophisticated machine, constantly shuttled through the crowd beneath his feet, emitting a certain emotion that made Ahriman feel uneasy and resistant. You're right, we should make them move faster, the efficiency is too slow now. With Fricks's words, hundreds and thousands of steel warriors were constantly emerging from the landing module, forming a yellow and black torrent. Every 100 meters, 2 warriors would stop to take over the areas that the 1,000 warriors were unable to manage. The joy of the strong army coming to aid lingered in Ahriman's heart for less than a minute, as he soon discovered that the unrest among the evacuees seemed to increase instead of decrease, accompanied by those steel warriors who were like gods of death standing on the roadside. These heirs of Pechalabo have clearly never carried out a similar mission. Whether it is the armor adorned with blood or the muzzle that has not been suppressed, it is enough to make the most stable imperial subjects whisper. I heard that a cult group called the Sons of Titan is obstructing our evacuation operation. Faced with Fricks's question, Ahriman just nodded. Yes, they have extraordinary influence in this world, especially with a series of disasters that have rapidly increased their power. Every day, people are lured by them to search for revelry and so-called divine grace in disaster areas. Why not eliminate them? Because objective conditions do not allow it. This answer made the Iron Warrior sneer. Don't tell me it's difficult, soldiers of the 15th Legion. We can completely select all the suspected targets and investigate them one by one, and even go even further, prioritizing the selection of technical personnel and young labor force, followed by eligible women and children, and then others. By categorizing it this way, we can quickly transport everyone in batches instead of wasting time like we do now. They are the subjects of the Empire, not the livestock, Fricks. Your approach will only lead to resistance, misunderstandings, and tragic human relations. Ahriman suppressed the urge to curse. Of course, he knew that Pechalabo's descendants did not have much patience with mortals. They always assumed that everyone would bow in front of numbers and efficiency, or that anything could be achieved through methods such as whipping mortals. A rough guy. This answer clearly did not satisfy Fricks, but just as he wanted the argument to escalate further, a visible riot suddenly exploded in the crowd. The two company commanders exchanged a glance and coincidentally jumped off the hill where they were located, squeezing away the gradually panicked crowd and rushing towards the chaotic location. In other places, countless Legion soldiers were also doing the same thing. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. My fellow countrymen. Glory. Carnival. We are blessed people. We are God's chosen ones. And now, we will ascend. We will merge with the great Lord of the Storm. It is now. The son of Sitton pleads with you, my fellow countrymen. In the farthest past, we once lost an opportunity, lost the favor of the gods. But the Lord of the Storm is merciful. He has bestowed upon us his miracles once again, he has given us the opportunity to be with him. Compatriots, I plead with you. I plead with you to lift your heads and look up at the sky. Cheer. Jump. For this storm is the revelation of its arrival. When Ahriman arrived, the fervent preaching had already been going on for a while, and Qianzi's platoon leader couldn't help but frown because he noticed an inexplicable frenzy emanating from the surrounding crowd. But this was not difficult to solve. Ahriman's 2 fingers slowly closed, and the crazy speaker involuntarily clenched his throat. He seemed to suddenly be unable to breathe, and fell backwards from the high platform, only hearing the sound of his body shattering. "Has the matter been resolved?" Phrix's voice came from the communicator, and Ahriman answered with unprecedented solemnity. "No, it's even worse." Captain Qianzi was very certain that his spiritual power had been limited to not enough to kill this person just now, which would only make him kneel due to slight lack of oxygen. And the scene before him was like a premeditated sacrifice. Yes, sacrifice. Almost as the speaker collapsed, Phrix could hear a hoarse roar from the crowd, echoing from all sides of him. "Murder! These evil gods' lackeys! They want to plunder our divine grace. Kill them! In the name of the Lord of the Storm!" Such shouts quickly appeared in patches, and the Iron Warrior was shocked to find that the quiet people seemed to have suddenly transformed into another kind of creature. They took off their cold jackets and exposed the ochre robes carved with golden long snakes inside, which was the symbol of the son of Titan. Long swords, axes, automatic guns, and even logging guns began to appear on their fingers, mercilessly shooting at everyone, whether it was a stat or the panicked people. When Phrix saw those several-year-old children and even pregnant women shouting and holding up their weapons, his surprise finally turned into a roar in the communicator. "What the hell is going on here?" The answer to him was Ahriman's bitter laughter, and Chico's power was surging wildly, doing everything in her power to build an invisible protective shield for every fleeing resident. "Do you remember the issue we discussed before, Alex? As I said, objective conditions do not allow it. Even a stat cannot stop the flow of blood." The streets were filled with screams, and the blades and bullets of the son of Titan struck from every corner of Sin, slaughtering everyone at all costs. In the first minute of the attack, hundreds of people fell. Dozens of Astartes were trapped in a frenzy of tens of thousands of people, with murderers and victims grinning in front of them. Even the oldest warrior dared not open fire casually at this moment. Ahriman and Phrix guarded the most chaotic place like towers, harvesting the lives of 3 to 5 cultists every time their explosive bombs were fired, along with signs and intuition, and then witnessing these insane opponents kill more people with indiscriminate attacks. "This won't work." Phrix's bomb tore apart another masked assassin, and then he saw a rocket launcher aimed at him. Grass. The Iron Warrior mustered up his courage, and in Phrix's low roar, his massive shoulder armor successfully pushed open the deadly Reaper. Ahriman's shield was opened in the most clever moment, saving the Iron Warrior and the hundreds of mortals behind him from the storm of shrapnel. Before the attackers let out a mournful scream, they were torn to pieces by fierce counterattacks, with scorching flames constantly emerging from a stat's muzzle, burning the sinful souls to ashes. Just as Alex ensured that the rocket launcher would no longer pose any threat, he suddenly heard a burst of laughter. The Iron Warrior quickly confirmed that it was not laughter, but a murmur, a wave, a surge in the spiritual realm that he could not explain. Ahriman's sigh came to his ears, a sense of relief waiting for reinforcements. With this sigh, a wonderful picture suddenly unfolded in front of Phrix. He saw the knives, guns, and sticks suddenly landing together, and their owners had lost their restless souls in an instant. He observed that the expressions on their faces had already solidified, just like a calm deity deliberately shaping them into a calm appearance. Subsequently, the hands of these sons of Titan slowly fell, and blue light floated around them, all bowing their heads as if their souls had been drained away, standing in place, allowing survivors to flee from them one after another. Phrix was still in shock, while Ahriman made a gesture to his subordinates. The 1,000 sons who had previously formed a safety zone separated from the Iron Warriors approached without hesitation, smashing the heads of each of the sons of Titan. Just as all this happened, the stormwind finally stopped at the center of the street, and the son of Pechalabo watched as a slender and tall woman emerged from it, surrounded by a blue light. With the appearance of this scene, an absurd idea began to emerge in Phrix's mind, until he saw Ahriman conversing with the visitor with respect, until the sound of Chico's introduction reached his ears. This is Ms. Morgan, a senior advisor to the Legion. I don't remember having this title. This is a silent person, Fricks thought as he looked at her face. Believe me, Morgan, just now, you saved thousands of Imperial subjects. Any hero who did such a thing deserves such honor. Everyone present will testify for you, including Alex. The Iron Warrior simply nodded blankly, his inquiry quietly transmitted to Ahriman through the communicator. How did she do it, or rather, what did she do? There's nothing complicated. First, you need to accurately predict each of the sons of the Titans from thousands of meters in the air, and then use the power of psychics to control their minds and bodies until the ground troops' bombs penetrate their heads, and that's all. It sounds easy. Can you do it? Everyone has their own strengths, and Ms. Morgan is a master of mind control. If it weren't for gender reasons, she would have been 1,000 sons long ago. Fricks's steel-cast face twitched from time to time, but he still couldn't properly accept everything in front of him. A mortal who may be even stronger than us, have you accepted so calmly? Faced with the question from the Steel Warrior, Ahriman only let out a burst of arrogant laughter. This is the magic of spirituality and subspace. Of course you won't understand. Fricks's breathing continued to remain somewhat suspicious and hoarse, and as the silver-haired lady slowly walked away, Ahriman patted his shoulder. It's okay, Alex. I know how you feel, but you don't need to be afraid of her. You know, I'm her guarantor. If you really feel uneasy, it's okay. We're about to meet the pathogen together, and you can definitely come with us. Trust me, you'll like her. Even your pathogen will be the same. Fricks squinted his eyes, feeling a hint of something amiss. The arrogant and reserved Ahriman seemed to have too much confidence in this mortal, as if he had been bewitched. Inducing as soon as the word appeared, it was mockingly thrown out of Fricks's head. He opened his mouth, but in the end, he did not express any doubts. The Li Mingxing incident was written by the Black Library, excerpted from the book, The Lord of Prospero, and its translation is available on Bilibili. So, whether it's the joint disaster relief efforts of two legions, or this kind of constrained estate, or even the character of Pechalabo who later appeared not quite right, they were all written by GW themselves. Perhaps at this time, they happened to be like this. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Dawn Redemption, 3, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Dawn Redemption, 3, Fricks ultimately failed to keep up. Ahriman felt regretful about this, and deep down, he still recognized this city breaker. Although he came from the crude and crazy Iron Warrior Legion, Fricks himself was indeed a good warrior. Magnus' descendants have become accustomed to treating the comrades of other legions with an arrogant attitude, and he can certainly do so. After all, these people are just a group of butchers who create slaughter and destruction on the battlefield, and their glory can only continue until the end of this long expedition. But the 1,000 Sons are different. The descendants of Magnus are engaged in a great cause that can benefit the entire human race infinitely. They strive to collect classics and rare books in every world they pass through, cherish the infinite wisdom on them, and do everything in their power to find and organize the remnants of the Golden Age. In Prospero, the collection of the most ordinary library alone is worth billions. The children believe that this is the most magnificent treasure in the galaxy, and no one can harm these carriers of wisdom under their defense. Nevertheless, they will still do everything for new discoveries in the galaxy. So, when I saw a set of books that Morgan had never seen before, even arrogance like Ahriman couldn't help but feel true joy. Is this newly obtained? The head of a village was once an outstanding traveler who possessed extraordinary powers in the history, geography, and ancient languages of the world, and was eager to compile his knowledge into books. You should invite him over, Morgan. Stormbird can definitely carry one more person. He has always insisted on staying with his family and friends, which is a large family with hundreds of people, but I can ensure that he arrived safely at the camp, where Hassel has taken over the defense. The sorrow of mortals. Ahriman shook his head, but was not worried that this map cannon would cause any spiritual harm to his companions. Morgan always liked to remain silent, and she rarely took the initiative to start a conversation. Even though her reputation between the Legion and auxiliary forces is already well known enough, few thousand suns have truly understood this lady, and even Ahriman's impression of her is just a few conventional items. Silent, extraordinary spiritual ability, attractive appearance, and extremely strong ability to handle things. You're coming back faster than I imagined. I thought you needed at least 3 more days. How's the situation? Have you encountered any problems? Overall, it went smoothly, but the residents kept mentioning a sect called the Son of Satan, and some were even staunch followers of them, from individuals to the collective behavior of the entire village. That's a cult. Generally speaking, they believe in a guy called the Lord of the Storm. This is a dereliction of duty by the local governor. Li Mingxing has been submissive for so many years, but he still hasn't been able to promote the truth of the empire. Ahriman mentioned the esteemed guardian in the most contemptuous tone, while conversing with Morgan and reporting the situation here to the Lord of the Legion. The footsteps of the two gradually faded away with a brief exchange of voices. Behind them, the Iron Warriors had organized a group of 10,000 people to clean the wreckage of the just massacre. The frantic cries and deep sobs intertwined in mid-air, illuminating the glorious city of Karina in the distance. Salamarv's is a fortress worthy of praise. Although he was somewhat different from the head of the 4th Legion in his heart, Ahriman did not go against his heart to smear the architectural art of the genoplasma. As the king of Olympia and the genoplasma of the Iron Warriors, Pechalabo did indeed have his unique qualities. It is said that his first move here was to personally lead the soldiers to rebuild this fortress. In just one night. Looking at the temporary command center in front of him, which was somewhat exaggerated by Estat standards, Ahriman's voice carried an inexplicable sourness. It looks like a permanent fortress. In fact, it is semi-permanent. According to Fricks, the 4th Army only needs 1 week and the lives of 700 soldiers to completely occupy this place. If there is enough firepower cover, then these two numbers can be removed in half. Ahriman continued to talk confidently, discussing almost ostentatiously the various rules and regulations for fortresses in the Astarte standard, and Morgan was the best listener. She was quiet but never dead silent, always asking interesting questions just right to keep the conversation going. In a place that Captain Xianzi couldn't see, invisible light waves kept flashing through Morgan's eyes, meticulously recording every word Ahriman said. As the topic gradually extended to the owner of this fortress, the atmosphere couldn't help but suppress. If unfortunately we have to meet with the genoplasma of the 4th Legion later, Morgan, I hope you can stay quiet, just like you've been doing before. I have heard of the name Pechalabo. Does this name make people feel uneasy? No, it's disgust. Genoplasma is certainly a great figure worthy of obedience, but our father Magnus commanded us with his wisdom and kindness, while Pechalabo was completely different. He relied on more ruthless than steel. I have fought alongside the Iron Warriors more than once, including the most brutal battle of Antinican. They were the most tenacious comrades, resilient but not adaptable. I still remember that they lost over 29,000 soldiers in that desolate world, but it did not defeat them. Then Pechalabo returned to the world of Olympia, as the father of the 4th Legion's genes. What happened next? He drew out 1/10 of his army's soldiers, which is 3,500 people, and demanded that they be killed alive by his comrades, from the highest-ranking officers to the lowest level of soldiers. I know several of the best steel warriors. They are indeed crude and belligerent, but they should not die like that. Die in the hands of a nitpicking lunatic. The final self-talk was so low that even Estat couldn't hear it, while Ahriman's only audience seemed indifferent. She just stared at the fortress in front of her, recounting its appearance. However, despite this, he still led his army to this world. Perhaps it has changed. Who knows? How can we guess the thoughts of any gene pathogen? Ahriman raised his head again, caressing the backs of the books, which began to improve his mood. Perhaps he became a saint among the stars. Or perhaps it's just basic obedience to the task. She always knows what she's thinking. Ahriman laughed, grateful that he had chosen to become friends with Morgan. Although he didn't always look down on ordinary people, it didn't mean he didn't like to form friendships with those truly outstanding people. Come on, my lady. I will take you to meet my genetic father, who is one of the wisest sages in this galaxy. You should have met him long ago. Yeah. I should have seen him a long time ago. It seems that you have also heard of Magnus' fame for a long time. Not only that, I joined the fleet of the Thousand Suns Legion precisely for him. Ahriman's laughter became rough. Why didn't he realize Morgan still had the skills he was praising before? Even among the half-divine descendants of imperial princes, Magnus was the particularly tall one, perhaps second only to the genetic pathogen Volgon of the 18th Legion. Anyone who sees this genetic pathogen will instinctively be surprised. Such a magnificent and majestic giant has never been crowned with strength and power, but is renowned for its exquisite and complex spiritual abilities and wisdom. As its nickname suggests, Magnus is a giant with red skin. He is not wearing armor, but rather a red and white robe, with the most obvious decoration being the emblem of the Thousand Legion. A circular ring with tentacles extending in all directions, like a black-hearted sun. But the most attractive thing was Magnus' eyes. The genetic pathogen of the 15th Legion only had one pupil shining purple light, while the other was as empty as a black hole. Genoplasma is not alone. Standing beside him are his two descendants, as well as senior advisors in the Legion. Atawa and Forsyth Taka. These two excellent estates now stand by Genoplasma like schoolchildren, the former showing a friendly smile to Morgan, while the latter chooses to turn their faces away, even lazy to look at her. Long time, Ms. Morgan. Many of my descendants have promoted your abilities and wisdom to me. Magnus' voice was mixed with unquestionable confidence and arrogance, as he slightly bent down to express his respect for this excellent mortal assistant. Ahriman has already told me everything that happened in the evacuation zone, and Hassel's report appeared on my data board early on. Fortunately, you clearly did not disappoint your spiritual talent, and I have to admit that as a mortal, this is very difficult to obtain. When he spoke of the word mortal, there was a noticeable pause in the tone of the Genoplasma, and he furrowed his brow slightly, feeling a sense of surprise. Ms. Morgan gave him a feeling that was different from other mortals, and some of her aura was more like herself and her brother. However, this idea was quickly erased by the genetic pathogen himself. Magnus did not believe that he could not recognize his bloodthirsty relatives, and he should only have brothers. After all, his father had never said anything else. Thinking of this, he straightened his body again and smiled under the gaze of the three heirs. Given your outstanding performance all along, Morgan, the senior advisor of the Legion, is the reward you deserve. But not now. As you can see, we have more urgent matters to attend to, but I assure you that your title will be confirmed at a more solemn and grand moment. However, before that, you can indeed accept the responsibility and authority of being a high-level advisor. All your actions and plans can be directly reported to me, and most importantly, you can be my follower and enjoy the infinite mystery in the subspace with me. Believe me, when you witness the endless unknown waters with your own eyes, you will find that no honor in this world is worth mentioning. The voice of Genoplasma is filled with tempting prospects, charm, and future. Both Ahriman and Genoplasma's two advisors are immersed in this voice. Obviously, they have explored the unknown mysterious void more than once. But unfortunately, none of these truly attracted the mortal in front of him. I was once forced to witness the waves of subspace, Your Excellency Magnus. From my personal perception, it is exceptionally dangerous to me. This successfully made Magnus laugh. Perhaps for you, yes. Magnus patted her shoulder. But now, you don't have to worry. In terms of exploring subspaces, I am undoubtedly a master. I have visited that place many times, observed and recorded everything I saw, and even communicated and exchanged ideas with its existence. Believe me, most areas of subspace are just harmless turbulence, and there are also some well-intentioned ancient creatures there. Everything is within my grasp, and there is nothing that knowledge and wisdom cannot solve. Magnus' arrogant voice echoed in his ears, and the gene pathogen, immersed in memories, did not look at the mortal's face at all. In an instant, the pathogen finally turned around and patted his hands, as if he had just remembered what he was going to do. That's it, everyone. The time we spent chatting and meeting has been long enough. Now, let's enter this fortress and enter the state of work. I believe my brothers must have been impatient waiting. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Dawn Redemption, 4, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Dawn Redemption, 4, Ahriman doesn't like Pechalabo. But this does not prevent him from admiring the beauty of art shaped by the genetic pathogen. While listening to Magnus' son's reminder to him in his telepathic communication, Morgan couldn't help but feel his heartfelt admiration for the scene before him, and his mind couldn't help but be filled with thoughts called comical. And such scenes are also understandable, after all, Pechalabo, regardless of his personality, is indeed a master in architecture and art. It is widely known that Dwayne and his Imperial Fist were the creators of countless fortresses, but it is not known that Iron Warriors and their genetic agents are actually better at this, but their talents rarely have the opportunity to be displayed. Unlike its rugged and towering appearance, the interior of Salamarv's fortress has been transformed by Petrobau into an exquisite and digital-style artwork, much like the ancient legendary Imperial Palace. The walls are polished with marble, adorned with black lamp racks, gold textures, huge tapestries, and scattered paintings, clean and orderly. In the crevices of these decorations, Morgan could see the hidden shooting ports and hidden whistles, which were distributed around the corners of the corridor and around the main hall, enough to turn the entire fortress into a dead cemetery in an instant. Led by Gen, the group steadily advanced, quickly passing through the front porch and a secret room filled with contemplatives and technical jargon. It was filled with busy mechanical instructors, and their electronic screens flickered with information from all over the world. Tens of thousands of messages undergo filtering and feedback in the calculations of these Martian visitors, from the loading of ships to the supply of supplies. The vast amount of data is enough to easily squeeze out any staff composed of mortals. Even the elites of the mechanical education can only guarantee that these data will not have too serious errors. As for those more precise calculations and decisions, they can only be handed over to the more mysterious and core room in the secret room. Specifically, the room is a mezzanine connected by a wide staircase, resembling a square processing workshop from the outside, emitting a mixture of precious metals and industrial oils. When they walked in, Pechalabo himself was staying there. If every soldier of the 4th Legion is a steel that can freely walk and fight, then this genetic pathogen of the 4th Legion can be said to be the living embodiment of the word steel. Every piece of protection, every chain, and even every screw on Pechalabo's body was handmade by him, making him look like a rock sculpture with a human face. He was slightly shorter than his brother, but still a giant enough for a stat to look up to. The hard features carved by knives and axes pieced together to create a great monster hunter, a ruthless victorious general, and the entire exterior of a gifted art master. You're coming too slowly, Magnus. We don't have any extra time for you to procrastinate now. Pechalabo's voice echoed repeatedly in this secret room like thunder, while Magnus simply spread out his hands as a gesture of gratitude to his brother. It was very difficult for the genoplasma of the 4th Legion and his brothers to embrace each other, and the drawing instrument he held tightly in his hand was revealed to several high-ranking officers of the 1000 Legion. They could see that it was covered with a plethora of starry data. Loading rate, travel time, cargo capacity, fuel reserves, fleet rotation, population inflow, food and water supply, airdrop arrangements, and hundreds of variables playing a role in the evacuation equation. Those numbers. Ottawa, known for his ruthless computing power, softly sighed to his brothers. There are too many of them. They make me dizzy. They inundate me like waves. Ahriman and Forsyth did not respond, but their equally serious expressions were the best answer. None of them noticed Morgan's usual expression, and at this moment, she was focused on looking at the numbers. It was almost a moment of breathing, and Morgan blinked his eyes, shifting his attention to something else. My advisors, you can also call them my trident. After a brief exchange of greetings, Pechalabo pointed to the only two iron warriors behind him. This is Haka, the other is Balben Falk, and Frix is responsible for commanding outside. Ahriman, my right hand, a platoon leader of the Legion. Ottawa and Forsyth, my advanced think tank. Think tank. I thought you had decided to give up on this project, Magnus. Our father and some brothers may not necessarily like it. At least St. Gilles supports me, he is a truly intelligent person in this matter. I can only hope that you will be careful enough. Pechalabo seemed to be preparing to say something more about his spiritual abilities, but his gaze was soon drawn to the only mortal present. What role does this mortal, my brother Magnus, play in your Legion? This is Morgan, Ms. Morgan, my senior advisor to the Legion and one of the candidates for the think tank. As soon as Magnus finished speaking, the silver-haired female official could sense the gaze from Francis, which was a mixture of astonishment and hostility. A mortal. He is an intelligent, hard-working, and exceptionally capable mortal. You know, Pechalabo, I will not reject any capable sage. I hope she is as you said. The Iron Lord waved his hand, gesturing for his subordinates to continue their previous work, while he arrived at the western edge of the Chamber of Secrets. Pressing the switch, a huge window emerged from the cover, and through it, the entire city of Carina could easily be seen. As a treasure of the Golden Age, Carina is a city that perfectly blends history and glory. Magnus first marveled at its exquisite layout for a second, and then was drawn to the truly important thing. I am preparing to reactivate the steadfast light. Pechalabo's voice came from his ear, and he was referring to the huge colonial ship in the center of the city of Carina. It was this ancient ship that brought the first group of human colonizers to this place several thousand years ago, creating everything that belonged to the Listar. Now, it stands there as a pure monument. It's already a relic, Pechalabo, a pure antique. Even Magnus was surprised by his brother's brief boldness. He quickly walked forward, carefully looked at the giant ship, and soon found that it was covered in dense steel. It was the descendants of Pechalabo and the laborers of the mechanical school working. Are you really planning to use it? Entrusting the lives of hundreds of thousands of refugees to an antique? I have no choice, Magnus. Pechalabo's finger pointed towards his workbench, which was already filled with a large number of charts and sketches, and Magnus could recognize some of them as data from various cross-track conveyors. Our cross-orbit transport aircraft can launch approximately 200 times a day, carrying 60,000 to 70,000 people out of this dying world and onto our fleet. This is just an ideal state where the ground launch center will not be disturbed, and we all know how severe the panic among the public is now. But this is not the most serious. The population of Limingxing has exceeded 2 million, and your and my fleet combined is only a few dozen ships. Even if we fill every compartment, we can only take no more than 1.6 million people away. Moreover, in the remaining 3 months, our fleet cannot complete the round trip between Limingxing and the nearest livable world. In other words, if I don't use it, 1/5 of the world's population will be abandoned and die in despair. Magnus breathed heavily and lowered his head, unable to refute his brother. The 1,000 Legion had arrived more than 50 days earlier than the Steel Warriors, but these numbers had never appeared so clearly in his mind. You're right, brother. Just as Magnus' deep voice began to echo, perhaps to relieve his father's embarrassment, or perhaps simply to believe so, Francis of the Thousand Sons Legion took a step forward, indicating that he wanted to speak. We actually don't need to take such an adventure, adults. Why? Shenzi Think Tank handed over the thick documents he had at his disposal to Pechalabo, which was a report of Hassel and others evacuating people around the world. There are many people in this world who refuse to evacuate. In those remote and barbaric mountain villages, they are unwilling to obey our orders to move out of their homeland, even in the city. Just in the resettlement area of Karina City, at least hundreds of people secretly flee back to the wilderness every day. Ahriman can prove all of this. Francis first stated his argument, and only after receiving Ahriman's silent nod did he slowly articulate his plan. Given this situation, I believe that since these ordinary people who have abandoned reason and logic are not even willing to rescue themselves, why do we still need to care about them? After all, even if these foolish guys are rescued, it will not benefit the entire empire. Leaving them aside, our rescue plan can proceed more quickly. By the time his last letter landed, the room had fallen into absolute silence, with only the sound of two tridents working incessantly. Do you think so? Pechalabo leaned against his conference table, his eyes blazing as he avoided his brothers and a few others, all focused on Francis. The expression of the genoplasma was like a disappointed teacher watching his uneducated student. The Iron Lord's question was deep and calm, without any hint of violence, but it made Francis involuntarily lower his head, and beads of sweat began to appear on his forehead. Magnus opened his mouth, wanting to say something for his foolish son, but before that, Pechalabo's firm and unquestionable declaration had already exploded. Listen. No matter how bright the flowers are, I won't let a young child run to the edge of a cliff to pick them without stopping them. I won't let you run to the vicinity of the 4th Army's landmine defense zone in this fortress without a map and proper training. We must discard this childish and ignorant idea and do the right thing. Do you understand why we need to do our best to save more people now? Francis's head was almost hanging on the ground, and he was as quiet as a dead corpse, only to answer in a low and genuine voice after a while. Yes, Your Excellency, I am very sorry. Almost at the same time, Magnus had already walked up with a smile and patted his brother's shoulder. Francis is a master of data processing, skilled in mediating issues composed of experience in absolute right and wrong, rather than philosophical and moral debates. I know, Magnus, I know. This kind of voice has also appeared in my Iron Warriors. They do not know the importance of rescuing mortals, and it is precisely because of this that we need closer cooperation. My brothers, urge our descendants to do their best to rescue more people. Of course, brother, I have been working so hard. So, I hope every soldier of Chienzi can devote themselves to disaster relief, just like my legion, instead of digging up relics in ancient libraries. On Pechalabo's face, Morgan saw a hint of cunning flashing quickly. That's just a small team, Pechalabo. I swear I won't send more people. A small team is not harmful to the overall situation. The discussion between the two pathogens quickly became rapid and intense, as they quickly divided the areas and tasks of their respective legions. The Iron Warriors would gradually take over everything related to evacuation and construction, Chico would disperse into small teams to assist them, Pechalabo would be responsible for all of this, and Magnus would immediately set off for a city inland, where it is said that the governor and his team had already appeared. As for Ahriman, Atava, and Forsyth, they each have their own tasks, either leading their own troops to defend one side, or delving deep into the ruins to find things that haunt Magnus. The discussion between the original brothers progressed rapidly in a gradually friendly atmosphere, until the last question emerged. No, Magnus, you must leave one person, at least an officer who can directly contact you. Pechalabo fiercely refuted his brother. We must be able to maintain communication at all times to prevent any unexpected situations. Don't rely so much on your spiritual power, you know, there are countless means and accidents in this galaxy that can make this power suddenly fail. Okay, Pechalabo. The repeated words of the Iron Lord left Magnus speechless, or perhaps he simply didn't want to continue arguing. Chienzi's genoplasma looked around and pulled Morgan to his side. The senior officer you want, my brother. A mortal. I'll repeat it again, it's my senior advisor. Have you personally tested her? My best offspring all recognize her wisdom and abilities, and I believe in their judgment. Pechalabo sighed, perhaps also tired of arguing, and finally nodded, allowing Magnus to quickly leave with his 3 offspring. Ahriman was the last one to leave, and as he passed by Morgan, he secretly stuffed something in. Until their footsteps disappeared, Pechalabo slowly lowered his head. He casually glanced at Morgan in front of him and walked back to his workbench. Let's start working, mortal. I hope my brother doesn't exaggerate this time. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Dawn Redemption, 5, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Dawn Redemption, 5, be careful of Pechalabo, don't be fooled by his momentary behavior and thoughts. Pechalabo is a monster with a split mind, and you can never imagine what new things are being considered in his mind. His rudeness may be seen as straightforward, while his advice may be seen as offensive, or he may completely reverse the two views. In short, his thoughts are constantly changing and cannot be fully grasped. He is a genius, that kind of non-human genius. Don't limit your impression to the scene just now. I have heard firsthand how he executed 1/10 of the soldiers on the first day of his return, and then turned to caring about the well-being of each soldier the next day. Therefore, if he suddenly becomes indifferent and ruthless towards the evacuees, don't be surprised, let alone try to confront them. Remember, he is a calm monster, but his calmness will never be released at the right time. Just quietly complete the work he delivers, and do not express opinions excessively. He may listen, but also think it is offensive and contemptuous, and fall into a rage that he cannot control, which is fatal. Finally, good luck to you. What Ahriman left behind was an invisible discourse that quietly infiltrated into a place that no one could notice, and spoke clearly in Morgan's heart. Morgan squinted her eyes and stood in place, carefully pondering every word of information left by Chinzi. First, she listened slowly, then recalled it again. Then, she took a step and came to the giant instrument next to Pechalabo. There were some unimportant information and data left on the light blue electronic screen that Pechalabo had not yet processed. Morgan glanced at Pechalabo's screen, and then she started working. Her green fingers ran back and forth between the keyboard, buttons, and data board, making a crisp sound. Soon, they merged into the digital symphony played by the Iron Lord and the Trident. Pechalabo did not deliberately spare the energy to pay attention to this new mortal. After Magnus left, he immediately immersed himself in the ocean of work. The electronic screens and data boards unique to the genoplasma constantly updated, sending the data of the entire world and expedition fleet to him. The Iron Lord almost handled these things on his own, his 2 tridents were more like apprentices doing odd jobs at this moment, sent by him to tidy up the things he had dealt with. Pechalabo stared at his screen, reading and processing at least 2 digits of information every second. However, despite this, Superman perception, belonging to the genoplasma, still faithfully told him that his brother's mortal advisor would peek at his screen every 5 minutes. But he doesn't care about such small matters. It was not until about 20.5 minutes later that the Iron Lord spoke out for the first time, his tone rudely tearing apart the originally harmonious ensemble in the Chamber of Secrets. I need the data of migrant workers in the eastern resettlement area of Karina City from early morning to noon today, dividing them by gender and age, and sending the data to me. The unquestionable voice of the original echoed in the Chamber of Secrets, and Pechalabo's orders had no designated executors, which was his habit all along. The Iron Lord never cared about how his subordinates divided and cooperated, he only needed answers. And until Pechalabo's voice completely dissipated in the secret room, he still did not receive an answer. Accompanied by this deathly silence, every second passed, and the face of the genoplasma became gloomy. Morgan could clearly feel the increasingly rapid sound of the 2 tridents tapping on the keyboard, as if the drowning person was desperately searching for a piece of driftwood. This panic lasted for about a minute until she could clearly hear the increasingly heavy panting of the genetic pathogen. Finally, the two tridents trembled and stopped, then turned around. Father. We only have information from 10 o'clock this morning. Morgan could hear Pechelabo's laughter, filled with suppressed laughter, which made the iron trident tremble uncontrollably. She carefully calculated until Pechelabo's dangerous gaze began to wander over the offspring, when Morgan pressed the button next to his hand. Ding! The news of the arrival of new information interrupted Pechelabo's deep anger. He turned his head, clicked on the document, and found that it was exactly what he wanted. Genoplasma glanced at the source of the letter and then turned his gaze to himself. He glanced at this mortal from the Thousand Suns Legion. She was calmly typing on the keyboard, as if she had just performed an ordinary task. Continue working. The sudden forgiveness caused the two tridents to glance at each other in confusion, while their father was once again immersed in the ocean of numbers. The ensemble is playing again. But this harmony did not last long, because shortly after, the gene pathogen spoke again. The latest data for the cross-rail transport plane D.447. I needed at least half an hour ago, why hasn't it completed today's transportation share? Morgan could feel the steel giant beside her turn around again, and everything in the Chamber of Secrets, living and inanimate, trembled with his breath. She could sense the rhythm of the two tridents becoming chaotic again. This time, she deliberately waited for a while before picking out the one from the many materials that had already been sorted out and sending it over. She could feel Pechelabo's gaze linger on her for a moment. In the following hour, this situation occurred one after another, and Pechelabo's questioning was as incessant as the thunder of a midsummer rainy night. His needs were chaotic and peculiar, and the tridents occasionally responded, but more often only mercilessly interrupted and disrupted their work rhythm. The purple light flowed through Morgan's blue pupils, expressing disdain for this urging method. Pechelabo's questioning may seem illogical, or rather, it is simply a reverence for certain internal logic that only he knows. He disdains to talk about why he needs them, simply whipping the whip of language and letting his descendants work hard, as if this can cultivate the best deputy. But this did not prevent Morgan from continuing his work. Her calculations and results easily surpassed those two poor tridents. With the observation of Pechelabo's work every few minutes, she could even classify what this steel lord needed in advance. As the intermittent questions continued, it seemed that the question of the genetic pathogen was no longer about asking his descendants, but rather he was more eager and curious about the answer of the mortal beside him. Until a piece of data about fleet fuel supply was also extracted by Morgan from the vast archives, Genoplasma clapped his hands and called his two descendants and Morgan to his side, his gaze carefully hovering in front of the three people. After a long time, he spoke to Morgan. Tell me why you can quickly find every piece of information I need. Due to prior preparation and categorization, Your Excellency. How did you know in advance what you needed to prepare? According to the actual situation, Your Excellency, I encountered an out-of-order incident in the resettlement area outside Carina City today, which undoubtedly disrupted the evacuation and transportation process of the people, thereby affecting the efficiency of cross-rail transport planes. Then there were issues related to loading space, travel time, rotation schedules, etc. You just mentioned, until finally, the transport ship needed more fuel supply because it stayed in the near-Earth orbit for a longer time, and all of this naturally needs to be classified and archived separately, so I prepared it in advance. Pechelabo remained silent and nodded. When his head turned back in front of his offspring, his voice had turned into a roar capable of tearing apart the giant beast. Now. Do you hear me? Actual situation. Prepare in advance. There is also a mind that can connect events with logic. As my descendants, are you too inferior to just one mortal in these aspects? Let's see what you're doing. Summarizing and organizing all the data from yesterday, is this what we need now? The enraged genetic pathogen had completely forgotten who had assigned this task to the two tridents, and he never thought about such a thing. Two prominent figures in the Legion, one below and one above 10,000, lowered their heads and allowed their father to vent his anger there. They knew that the reason for their father's anger was not due to slow progress or lack of data, but that even inferior to ordinary people. Now, go out and get me first-hand intelligence and data. I don't want to see those texts that should have recorded this afternoon's transportation volume and unexpected situations still shrouded in mist. Also, tell Fricks that if he can't perform the Trident job well and become my eyes and ears, then he'll leave his position and become a private for me. The sudden and irrational anger of the genoplasma eased slightly as the two warriors hurriedly left, and he returned to his workbench. This time, his fingertips emitted the heaviest syllables on the keyboard. Morgan first observed his progress as usual, and then began her work. She waited for the sudden exam of the genetic pathogen, and she didn't wait too long. Food supplies storage in the southern warehouse of Carina City. Soon, Pechalabo's request came. Morgan didn't even pause, as she tapped on her task and casually picked up the document and sent it over. A haze flashed in Pechalabo's eyes. Subsequently, the problems from genetic pathogens became increasingly complex and increasing, from the most important itinerary and reserves, population influx and airdrop arrangements, to the demolition of real estate and buildings. Then, the center of the problem gradually moved away from the most important urban areas and resettlement areas, and extended to places that could be said to be insignificant. The population evacuation situation in the Chijin Mountains. Ding. Real estate transportation situation in Zalujin City. Ding. The storm movement in the Orcus Mountains and its impact on the city of Carina. Dot. Morgan squinted her eyes and carefully glanced at Li Mingxing's map. The Orcus Mountains and Carina City were separated by a whole half-world. What came to her mind? Through the corner of his eye, Morgan caught a glimpse of Pechalabo's face, which was a gloomy and composed expression. As a result, she slowly moved her hands away from the keyboard. Sorry, Your Excellency. I didn't realize the importance of this intelligence and placed it in the third priority. I have only completed 75% now. If you need it, I can prioritize it. As soon as Morgan finished speaking, his smile returned to Pechalabo's face. No, there's no need to blame yourself. At this time, it is the season of Li Mingxing's frenzy. According to past records, there is a 3.5% probability that storms in the Orcus area will affect the weather conditions of Carina City, and from an ordinary person's perspective, such data cannot be noticed. You've done very well, Morgan. Now, keep working. Successfully defeating the mortal in front of him seemed to have lifted the mood of Genoplasma. He once again pounced on his work, and the sound of typing on the keyboard and data board became light and bright. Morgan lowered his head, covered his pupils, and put on an educated appearance. Yes, Your Excellency. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Dawn Redemption, 6, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Dawn Redemption, 6, about 10 years have passed since Pechalabo reunited with his father and joined this great expedition aimed at reclaiming the galaxy. If one word is to summarize the decade in which the Iron Lord entered the galaxy, then there is only confusion. Pechalabo is always confused. When he was in his hometown of Olympia, looking up at the lonely starry sky and the terrifying eyeball, he would be confused and lament the injustice of fate. Why should he be given such wisdom, yet abandon him among a group of mediocre people? When he reunited with his own offspring, he suddenly realized how unbearable his army was. They would lose almost half of their combat power in a simple battle, and in his view, the soldiers of the Fourth Army were far from being excellent soldiers. So, the phrase, 11 strikes, gently floated out of his mouth, and he watched coldly as the unfortunate ones who were picked out were beaten to death by his comrades, and soon fell into new confusion. Why, after such a warning, his descendants still cannot compare to Shadow Moon Wolf or Dark Angel. In this confusion, Pechalabo commanded his army, and his doubts continued to expand as the war continued, inevitably affecting his emotions and work efficiency. However, he couldn't help but become increasingly confused by more disappointing realities. Just like now, a new confusion is forming in Pechalabo's mind, growing and expanding, making the genetic pathogen restless. Why is his offspring, the trident carefully selected by him, even inferior to a mortal under Magnus? Why do these guys always disappoint him so much? Are they dissatisfied? Are they using this method to resist his rule? And his brother Magnus, why did he keep a mortal here? Is this a demonstration? A kind of showing off? Does he really not know the excellence of this mortal? Is it really just an unintentional move when he arranged for this mortal to stay here? Is Magnus mocking? Laughing at his descendants? Laughing at his legion? Or mocking the genetic pathogen of this steel warrior? As his thoughts were brewing, the face of the Iron Lord was darkening at a visible speed to the naked eye, and his ensemble became once again subdued unconsciously. Pechalabo began to treat his work harshly, as if they were his life and death enemies. When his descendants who were working on the restoration of the firm light sent him the results of the first phase of the project, Pechalabo almost forced himself to find a problem. Without hesitation, he drew this subtle flaw, angrily criticizing his disappointing children through the screen. Their roughness and inferiority made him feel nauseous. Fool! He used this crude mockery as the concluding remark on the assessment of the engineering results, and then closed the communication, allowing them to argue and solve the problem on their own. At this moment, he caught the sound of ordinary people working around him stopping. Morgan has finished organizing the last data file in front of her, and according to the logical order and importance of each task, she has sent all the information to this gene pathogen who has never rested before. Although she was born with the most ingenious use of data and logic, dealing with such a large quantity for the first time still made her feel tired, let alone carefully concealing her identity in front of a similar person. The cost of this task is even more exhausting than the work itself. But just as she was about to close her eyes and take a little rest, Pechalabo's icy tone came from the side. The data in the 7th summary table is missing. Please make a new copy and complete it within 15 minutes. Morgan's almost narrowed blue pupils suddenly opened, and she was confident that the 7th summary was still sitting well on Pechalabo's electronic screen, waiting for his examination just before she closed her eyes. Yes, Your Excellency. She deliberately made her voice transform into firm execution after a brief hesitation. After all, this inexplicable missing file contains thousands of data pieces, enough to make an ordinary person feel pain. And just as her fingers returned to the work keyboard, Pechalabo's voice came again, this time with a slight imperceptible tremble in his tone. No need. Leave it to me, you can go. Rest now. The head of the Iron Lord rises high, as if deliberately not wanting to be seen by mortals. What the hell are you doing, you idiot? On his raised face, Pechalabo's steel face was twisted together by him. What is the difference between venting one's anger towards a mortal, a mere mortal, and those vulgar cowards at the Olympics? The innate arrogance and artistic sentiment once again occupied Pechalabo's heart at this moment. When he was consumed by the anger of jealousy and self-doubt, he was a tyrant eager to destroy. Therefore, he naturally destroyed the result that may have taken countless energy and time, just like he had destroyed his own offspring and countless kingdoms without pressure. But when witnessing the destruction of the results with one's own eyes and listening to the slow yet firm execution with one's own ears, the heart that harbored a love for art and logic once again occupied the kingdom of thought. Petrobona tore apart his inner half and questioned him, a soul composed of burden, silence, and unimaginable arrogance. It has always been like this. Whenever things don't develop as expected by Pechalabo, he gets angry, and goes all out to destroy and vent until he witnesses his actions. He feels guilty and regretful, then silently repairs it and is moved by his silent efforts. But this complete self-emotion cannot bring applause from the outside world, nor can it relieve his emotions. Therefore, his anger will accumulate again, waiting for the next outburst, repeating it until those calmness and emotions are worn away, leaving only a tyrant who is forever angry and resentful. But now, it's too early, the Emperor's expedition has just begun, and the fierce battles and trials that belong to Pechelabo are not enough to make his calmness fade away. Pechelabo remained silent as he began this extra job, which he had added himself. He suppressed the anger and emotions in his heart, allowing them to scorch his soul. Steel is not afraid of flames, he always believed so. The data was being processed at an extremely fast speed, and out of some idea that only he found himself, Pechelabo carefully examined Morgan's work results, and the final fact made him have to admit that this mortal's work ability was indeed as outstanding as Magnus claimed. She is a character worthy of appreciation. At the same time, the instinctive perception of the genetic pathogen was also wandering in the secret room. He could hear Morgan, who had received the command to rest, first stretching his body, and then carefully looking around the entire room behind him. Her gaze seemed to be immediately drawn to the huge colonial carrier in the center of the city, the firm light. Pechelabo could hear her reasoning in a low voice. This kind of reasoning lasted for a short time, and then he heard the sound of high heels stomping on the marble floor. With a superhuman sense of loyalty, he gave him feedback on the owner's movements. When he realized where she was going, the cold hair on Pechelabo's neck involuntarily moved. As if attracted by their uniqueness, Morgan involuntarily walked towards the depths of the secret room, where rows of long tables made of steel, about half a person high, were displayed. On top of them were various exquisite models and handicrafts. Even in the dimly lit depths of the room, they still shone with the brilliance of art and skills. She could see those strange artworks, such as a model of a large theater, which was clearly a semi-finished product, and at the top of the theater, it was not an area for ventilation and walking, but a defensive battlements. The name Taliaclone was written on the paper the model was pressed against. Next to it are more completed items. A model of a giant lighthouse, carved with wall patterns depicting heroes killing sea monsters, a temple-like building, with layers of bookshelves and debating platforms faintly visible inside. There are more drawings, which have been rolled up and placed in the corner of the table. One of them is spread out, depicting a golden lion statue. The feet of this fierce beast are marked with a gift-like symbol in Terra language. Morgan blinked his eyes. She could feel that as her footsteps and gaze surrounded these artworks and semi-finished products, the working rhythm of the genoplasma standing in front of the workbench was slightly disrupted, like a real lion witnessing an ignorant little beast stepping into its own kingdom. Pechelabo observed the offending mortal with the corner of her eye, unconsciously walking in a place where the Iron Lord did not want others to know. He watched her walking there with a familiar feeling, which reminded him of something. Decades ago, when he was a genius child and general adopted by the lord of a city-state on Olympia, his foster father also walked among the artworks he had created. He remembers the words he asked his adoptive father and the answers he received at that time, and he has always remembered them. So, when the last piece of data was also organized in an absolutely correct way, he spoke up. "What are you looking at?" "I am looking at waste, useless and extravagant waste. My child, my Pechelabo, you possess a divine mind and power. Why waste your life on these useless things? I can easily possess these so-called arts, and countless sculptors and painters have gained superiority through my sponsorship. With just a snap of their fingers, their so-called art will become a tribute to me, even if those achievements never exist. But you're different, my child. Your abilities shouldn't be limited to these useless things. Look at your deadly inventions. Tanks, artillery, and explosives. That's what you should unleash. They can easily win, dominate wars, and even conquer the world. I am looking at art, Your Excellency, I am looking at a burning heart buried and misunderstood." At the moment when his adoptive father's voice dissipated in his mind, Morgan's answer followed one after another. "On the contrary." Pechelabo smiled. He turned around and left his electronic screen for the first time. Behind him, commands that were enough to keep the world busy for the rest of today were being sent out in an orderly manner. Art. This is just some entertainment, madam. You should know that I am a general, and I do not need so-called art. No one will need them. You should understand that you are serving an empire, a place composed of emperors, generals, and armies. Pechelabo spoke, recounting his self-evaluation that he didn't believe at all, and the reality that he had to believe. Then, he saw Morgan smile. Do you enjoy death, Your Excellency? This was almost an offensive sentence, and a few short words successfully made the Iron Lord's face once again gloomy. If this is your terrible metaphor, then I will tell you incredibly clearly that in the Milky Way, no one truly enjoys death unless it is thrown at the head of their own enemies. Yes, no one likes death, and no one wants death. Whether it's an individual, a legion, or an empire, death is always resisted. The silver-haired female official crossed her fingers and pressed them against her chin. Death is an unknown tranquility, a pitch-black silence, and a sad future with no dreams, passion, changes, or surprises to speak of, but a world without art and aesthetics. Isn't that also true? Pechelabo remained silent, his eyes shrouded in shadows, his lips trembling, but he did not speak. When the Milky Way is engulfed in eternal war, soldiers and bloodthirsty war machines move forward on endless wastelands. Every person in every world has no mission other than to provide supplies for cannibalistic wars. Paintings and songs are seen as useless waste, statues occupy theaters, scriptures obscure academia. What is the difference between such a world and death? And we are fighting here, crossing the Milky Way in galaxies on our journey. We are dedicating everything we have for a better future. Isn't it precisely to prevent this from happening in the future of humanity? Heavy breathing sounds. Until then, Morgan seemed to wake up from a dream. She lowered her head and realized that she had offended a genetic pathogen. Please forgive, Your Excellency, I just... No. Pechelabo interrupted her, and he remained quiet for a while until the final electronic sound came, which meant the end of today's work. And a moment's rest. Then, he pointed to the seat next to him and spoke in a commanding tone. Sit down. He said. Continue speaking. End of this chapter.